To developments now further afield, will Africa be a key focus of incoming U.S. President Donald Trump's foreign policy agenda? Historically, the continent has received only cursory attention from previous administrations. But with a second Trump presidency ushering in a change of guard, experts say it's in the U.S.'s best interest to keep working with and investing in key African players, particularly South Africa. Latashia Naidoo has more, joining us now live from Cape Town. Latashia, good to have you on. What are people anticipating in the Trump administration?
Good afternoon, Tabo. Well, Trump's second term could have a potentially difficult future for the continent of Africa. We know that historically his policies have favored U.S. interests, and like you mentioned, it's been a cursory form of attention for African nations over the past. In fact, he's referred to African nations previously in very derogatory terms, which has now raised questions by experts as to what the potential of the second Trump presidency could spell for the African continent as a whole, but in particular South Africa. But here to tell me more is Leonard Mbulle-Nziege, who is a research analyst and senior consultant in business and economic intelligence. Leonard, thank you for speaking to us. We know that there's been a lot of concern, particularly arising from the continent, in terms of what the second Trump presidency can mean in terms of policy for the continent, but in particular with a focus on South Africa.
Good afternoon, and thank you to all your viewers for tuning in. So there is a lot of consternation because, first and foremost, the United States has habitually put Africa at the back. Africa has never really been a priority with respect to U.S. foreign policy, and Donald Trump has said that he's going to double down on his America First agenda. There are also other foreign policy priorities, such as the war in Gaza, the war in Ukraine, which might also create a scenario where Africa will be looked at less. And then you also have, with respect to Africa in particular, you have the AGOA, that's African Growth and Opportunity Act. That is the legal framework which allows customs-free access to African products to the U.S., which now is eligible for 32 countries. And it's not clear whether Trump is going to renew it because, as he said, he wants to put an America First agenda, and that particularly alludes to trade. So in that sense, for Africa in general, there is a lot of consultation. And then concerning South Africa, I think that we can go more into that.
In relation to South Africa, we've previously enjoyed favorable relations. I mean, the U.S. is our second largest recipient of exports from the country, second only to China. But in terms of recent developments with regard to South Africa's support for Russia and our stance on Palestine, could this spell a positive future with regard to this new administration?
Yes, as you noted, I mean, South Africa and the U.S. since 2022, there have been very noteworthy disagreements with respect to who South Africa is engaging with. And this is really put into question whether South Africa can move forward in a positive manner with U.S. relations. As you noted, 7.5 billion investment in U.S. dollars was made in South Africa in 2021, and bilateral trade amounted to about $23 billion in 2021. So South Africa is the U.S. largest trade partner, and it has the largest investment stock on the continent. Now, that being said, with respect to the various disagreements, I think that even though there have been disagreements, there is been a lot of room for dialogue at very high levels. You've had South African ministers who have made various trips to the U.S. There are also forums like the Congressional Black Caucus, which have been interacting with South African leaders to see if there can be some sort of rapprochement and understanding. And then you also have forums such as the bilateral annual forum between South Africa and the U.S., which exists for there to be positive interactions in future. But nevertheless, it is very unpredictable with respect to the Trump administration. And I think that, there's going to have to be a compromise on both sides. And you have two, South Africa is a hegemon on the continent, and the U.S. is the leading superpower. So there is going to be a clash of heads in that sense, but then I think there's going to be room for compromise.
Thank you very much, Leonard. Well, Tabo, some insightful insightful comments coming out from Leonard there with regard to South Africa's existing relationships with the US, in particular that AGOA trade partnership, which has existed over a number of years. We also are, like I mentioned earlier, the US is our second largest export recipient. In fact, 7.8% of US exports in 2023 came from South Africa. So while the future of Trump's Africa policy remains unclear at the moment, particularly with a focus on South Africa, there's still room, according to experts, for discussion, for growth, for high-level meetings to be had to strengthen those bilateral trade agreements and ties that have existed with the U.S. long before Trump assumed power. And this new term that is being ushered in tomorrow with regard to his inauguration could spell the potential for greater engagement with the continent, but with a particular focus on South Africa.
Latashia, we appreciate you and thanks for your intervention this afternoon.